So good morning, everyone. I'm Martyn Cockram. I suppose my background for the last 20 odd years has been working across local government, big transformation and change pieces. In Northamptonshire at the time, I was programme director of a major transformation taking place there across adult social care and public health, and at the same time was a slightly different title, head of Future Northants, as it was called in Northamptonshire, which was their response to their local government reorganisation request. So, Timmy.
Thank you, Martyn. I'm Tim Carr. I've done very similar service across local government, a bit of private sector as well. Don't ask me why and don't ask me how, but it has worked and helped me as a great leveller, really, in terms of how, in many ways, local government is advanced in its thinking and its change. I've met Martyn some years ago, and I was lucky enough to be invited to work with him on the social services and public health preparation, really, for Safe and Legal. And so my particular role was to sort of make it happen. So Martyn was really much the strategic, getting things in place, working at programme level. And my role was very much around the implementation. So hopefully that will come through in the slides and the presentation that we give. And looking forward to maybe speaking to some of you in the future through Harrison. But anyway, Martyn, off you go.
I'll just point out to you guys that you might be wondering why there are pictures of some, for me, punk icons in the slides as we go through. And quite simply, LGR is probably the biggest disruption that you're going to encounter for some of you guys in your careers in local government. At that time, punk rock was the biggest disruption that ever hit my musical choices. So there you go. So anyway, right, ready to go into this. I was going to say let's rock and roll. No, but let's not do that. Let's pogo. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about over the next 45 minutes or so. As you've joined, we're going to be talking to you about Unitary councils in North and West Northamptonshire, how they were established and the work we were doing. 5 key areas of the programme which really drove us going forward, and we touch on those in the next slide. And some of the challenges we experienced in the journey into vesting day, which was delivered through COVID. So for all of you would have worked through that as well, I'm sure. So you understand the challenges that we had there. And doing what's right and important, and that'll do. Not getting stuck was a key thing. We didn't have the time to get stuck. So that'll do and good enough was part of the mantra, but it had to be really good enough. Okay, so when we looked at shaping the programme, and bearing in mind we're part of a wider programme across all of Northamptonshire and including all of the districts and boroughs, which are 8 local authorities in all. We had to think it through very quickly. So we're in adult social care and public health. A slightly different position and proposition to some of the districts and boroughs in that, as we're heading towards Unitary, 2 Unitaries, we were breaking down a large adult social care and public health functional area of £253 million worth of budget and 1,600 staff and everything that covers with that, the assets and so on and so forth, into 2 new Unitaries, whereas the districts and boroughs were coming in towards vesting day from a different angle. So we were always in a slightly different position to the rest of the programme, which made life quite interesting. And if you are in a functional area like adults or children's, then your experience of what goes on in local government reorganisation eventually might be slightly different to some colleagues in districts and boroughs initially. So 5 key areas for us was to get the future operating model designed and ready to go and in by vesting day. It had to be in, and it had to be ready to rock and roll, ready to go. Significant areas around compliance were a real worry. We were watching what had been going on in other LGR areas which had gone through it, and we knew that our IT, our GDPR and our DPIA compliance needed to be really, really good and really, really tight. There were nothing that could be wrong, because on vesting day, Northamptonshire County Council wouldn't exist and West Northampton and Northants would exist. So therefore we had to be compliant across some really large areas. We referred to the work we were doing. Tim mentioned Safe and Legal. We were doing Safe and Legal Plus. And what that meant essentially was not all transformation stopped, We were still delivering £34 million worth of savings. We were still moving the model of delivery to an outcome-based model. We were looking at where the assets were kept. We were trying to have conversations outside in with people who were receiving services at the same time as I say, as not just doing transformation, keeping the lights on and running business as usual. We also, it was really important to support people through change in whatever way that worked for them. And by that, I mean being available, being visible, having workshops, thinking about how do you actually support people through change, being honest and open, and actually having those conversations, being able to have those conversations. And through COVID, that became a little bit more challenging, but we just about got there. Thanks to the technology of how we're speaking to you guys this morning, I suppose. And looking at what opportunities and collaboration arose for LGR, because it was an opportunity to reset some partnership arrangements, reset some of the way we worked with some of the voluntary sector and so on and so forth. So it was a real big opportunity for a reset, which we probably wouldn't have got to as quickly had we been doing normal transformation. Thanks, Harrison. So I mentioned there organisational design was what? Well, it was collaborative with services. It was essentially, this is, I sometimes say that doing the work I do, I feel like I work for Specsavers. And it's a little bit like, is it better now or is it better now? Is it clearer now or now? How does this look? Is it good now or not? So it was developing models at pace. And my background is in organisational development and design as well as programs. So what was helpful was having an understanding of how we could share and show some of the information. Quite complex, very, very detailed, as you know. But how do we model it to make sense for people across services within adults and public health, children's, in housing, across partners in all sorts of areas as well, health, and how did we help members be able to engage with it? And how did members understand what it meant for them, what it meant for their constituents? And also then how do we actually shape the models that we're thinking about to staff? What did that mean? How do we get staff involved in creating their new world? That was important to understand and let them understand that they could actually try and influence some of the things we were thinking about. Fast-paced, as I say, developed many options and it was fast-paced, had to be. And we used Goldilocks information. What I mean by that is just enough. It was just enough to make a decision and go. And you could always circle back if you needed to sense check. And I think I got on Tim's nerves with the amount of sense checking we were doing and I was doing. But it would be our stakeholders and having those stakeholders involved, which really, really helped as well. And challenging. Local government reorganisation is an opportunity for change. If it looks like it did now, and it can't, but if it did look very similar, then have another look, have another think. There'll be a load of things that you will be talking about that you could and should change every time you meet at the coffee machines, every time you have these conversations, if only. But these are real opportunities for change, so grab them. And people led from outside in. Very easy sometimes when you're running programs of work, transformation, change, etc., that you ripple out. You tell the people this is what it could look like, should look like. You've got to invest in having people actually being able to inform and own, because that's really where you get the actual buy-in that people can start to own their outcomes and shape their own futures as well. So that was key as well. So people led from outside in was a key thing. Yeah, okay, next slide. So you need a set of good design principles. I'd get pretty upset if I didn't have a good set of design principles. These were design principles how we would run the program of work. So these are not what the actual outcome of the models would look like in the organisation. But I don't think you'd be surprised to see some of those. And I think really, realistically, when I scribbled these down some years ago, there were many more than 14. But by working with some of the guys on the program and some of the stakeholders, we managed to ripple down these to the major ones. And I was looking last night at these again, and I think some of the ones here would still resonate today. And I was quite chuffed and satisfied, I suppose, with how we were able to bring people back to these. And the other thing which was quite important was I recalled again last night when I was thinking about this, it was okay to break a design principle, but you needed to know why you were breaking it and what you were going to do to make sure that the rest were still relevant. So what I mean is don't be a slave to them. These are guiding principles. If you're going to break it, but break it for a really, really good reason, but make sure you've got the evidence as to why it was a good idea at the time. And why do you do this? Because it's all about narrative, and it's all about taking people along on a journey with you. And actually, you'll get to a point where you'll develop an operating model, which is a legacy document for people who'll come after you. And it's a legacy document for when you will sit down and you go, why did we do that? And so, again, it's part of a story. Okay, next slide, please, Harrison. Now I get overexcited about these sorts of things. So I love a good canvas. And these are the design principles coming alive. And this is what Northamptonshire adult social care and public health wanted their future to look like across all of these key areas. And it was, again, the idea where we start to think about change. So what? And you should be hearing yourself say that quite a bit throughout the LGR journey. So what is quite a key question. And you know, things in here like these were quite big changes at the time. We were moving to something in the north. If you're in the adult social care space, children's space, you'll be aware of things like the 3 conversations model, outcome based, user centered, all about what makes life useful for these people who you're working with across the county. And it's also about quite a big change in the way that people work internally. So it was quite a big change for directors, assistant directors, and some of the other heads of service and staff themselves. But again, working through at pace, we were able to develop the actual model by which Northamptonshire and North and West Northamptonshire would operate. So you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go through each of those boxes, but this is about imagery for you guys to get a sense. What I really hope at the end of this is you get a sense of the thud of the amount of work that there is to do, but equally that there is some simple frameworks that you could follow which actually help you go through the gears on this a bit. Thanks, Harrison.
Yeah, Martyn, I'm just going to jump in there just quickly, actually, just with a question that's come through around the slides and whether a copy of them sort of would be possible. And just some context, I thought we'd include as much information as possible just so that we can sort of provide that understanding and insight and then sort of talk over them. But are we able to provide these slides at the same time after the call?
Yeah, fine by us. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's that answered. Brilliant.
The whole point, of course, is that you can only share the knowledge if you're happy to share it. You know, so yeah, absolutely.
We've got a timeline for the start to vesting day later on in the slides as well, so that will be covered. Just another quick one there. Martyn, back to you.
Thank you. So I love this one. One of the things we were struggling with across the Future Northants LGR program was how do you tell the story once and how do you tell the story on a page? I love a story on a page, which again I drove Tim mad on this and others in the program. But the story on the page is just fundamentally important. And what I'd say about it is it's probably good enough. It's probably right at the time. And some people would say, well, I don't quite get that, or I would prefer it to be a little bit like. But all this is a moment in time. But how do you tell the story to partners, to citizens, to members about what you're trying to do as a council? So this was something which I developed along with the GUT team, so that we could actually go send this across the whole of the Future Northants program, so that people get a sense of the scale of and how everything starts to come together and what a new council could look like. Next slide, please, Harrison. And there you go. This was in some of our blueprint at the end. This is the actual wiring for us as a unitary council going forward, but decluttered. And again, it might be useful for you guys when you start to do your thinking around whatever model you end up. I know you're in business case territory at the moment, and that'll be fun as well, I'm sure. Is really what do you want it to look like, and how you're going to make it simple for people to understand, simple for you to understand. And one of the things we found by doing this as a very small, beautifully formed program team, I think there were 8 of us in all. 3 or 4 of us working on LGR and the other guys on the transformation program still, which run at the same time, was how do you make it simple enough so that people can understand it? And it was really important to the DAS and some of the adult social care leadership team that both new unitaries, as it says there, were great places, or provided great places to grow up, get on and grow old. And again, just a really, really simple diagram of something uber complex. So next slide, please, Harris. Now then, so I mentioned working fast and at pace and Goldilocks, this and that'll do. One of the things which was a real challenge across the program was knowing where each work function was. So I think we had about 8 or 9 different functions going on. And one of the things was, how do you migrate your all the thinking you're doing? Bear in mind, I think I was looking again last night at the straw men stuff that was being done at the time at pace with workshops with the leadership team and with various about 10 different functional areas across adults and public health. And every single one of those draft straw man documents was around 60 to 70 slides. So how do you migrate that into something that you actually can come together and say, as a program, are we there? Have we arrived at the blueprint that we're trying to design? So again, sitting down with the team, and they came up with this, and we talk about the Donald Rumsfeld moment a lot back then, about things that we weren't sure of, and didn't know we needed to be, and so on and so forth. So that little model there, we found it really, really good as a grounding and as a baseline for what we were trying to do. And it kind of self-explains itself about, stop worrying about things we agree on, because human nature was we kept going back over that, and suddenly you realize, hang on, wait a minute, there's a shed load of stuff, technical term, page 92 of the Prince 2 manual, if you're aware of the program management terminology in the manuals. You've got to love a manual. Things that we haven't thought about yet. And you might think, well, how do you know about that? But someone will have thought about it. And you just start to build up a nice ticking list of things that you need to go through, on the basis that if you apply the 80-20 rule, you're going to get to a point whereby you're actually scrapping around trying to think about things that you hadn't yet imagined. And again, I know I drove the business analysts and the project team and the actual functional work guys in commissioning and brokerage and across discharge to assess colleagues in health about what have we forgotten, and it does become a little bit like an episode of The Simpsons with Lisa Simpson knocking on front doors. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Again, but it's an important part of your design approach. Next slide, please, Harrison. So, Safe and Legal Plus was what? A detailed piece of work across key service areas. In adult social care, it was across about 10 functional areas where we had to look at what would be the impact as the old organisation expired and the new ones came in. Because at midnight click on vesting day, Northamptonshire County Council no longer existed, and the 2 new unitaries were born. It was seriously risk-based, and I mean seriously risk-based, and I don't mean in terms of having a risk log. We had a engine room for adult social care, whereby this was on a wall. This was walled. We had people walk in, and we had a chief exec, I think from East Northants, was our critical friend, who came in on a weekly basis. It was a weekly basis, and he challenged and kicked and challenged. I don't mean kicked us. He was kicking the actual sense of what was being said. We had another director in from one of the districts who was the tagged assurance to us. And again, she was able to just, her background was in housing essentially, so it was incredibly useful as well, because some of the questions we were like, good point. And I think it was, again, assured again. Goldilocks data didn't apply for sure. I think I drove the business analysts absolutely bonkers on this, and the functional work areas. And the approach enabled us to transformation to continue where it was sensible to do so. And the change freeze is something which is important, which again we introduced into the conversation in Northants about at what point do you go enough? Because essentially all the work you're doing and all the work you're thinking about starting to do, why are you starting to do it? Just transform and keep doing what you can do and what you should be doing, because you can land well before vesting day. I think in Northants, the agreement we had with the DAS at the time was somewhere around 3 months before vesting day, we would not start anything new. We would be kicking the tires on the new models. I used to say we're running an above the counter operation in terms of what people can see, but the below the counter operation is we were ready to go. Our models were ready. We were running shadow operated models to help people get used to the way they're going to work. So change freeze was quite important. So next slide, please. Okay, this is what safe and legal looks like. These are all of the areas where we sat down with the duvet over the head and the torch, as you probably did when you were reading when you were a kid, when you were meant to be asleep. But all of the key areas where we thought, okay, where do we need to touch? What do we need to make sure we've got covered off? What does it mean we make sure that we're going to actually, because don't forget, adult social care was splitting from one big function into two unitary functions. What is it that we need to do? And one of the things which I was reminded of last night was one of these things where I was saying, well, what do we need to do that we hadn't really realised that we do need to do yet? And one of the assistant directors looked up from her desk one day as I was passing by and said, oh, I probably need to have a chat with the bank, don't I? We probably need to actually talk to the bank about creating the new bank accounts. And also CQC registration. We need to make sure we've got both unities registered for CQC. And again, you might think that's obvious, and you might think, well, how do you forget them? But if you think about all the noise and you're delivering business as usual and you're transforming at the same time, you need to have that bandwidth to actually get a conversation going. And things like this help conversations get going. Where you see technology eclipse as a type there, just to pick that up, that was the adult social care system. And unfortunately, although we could have gone down 2 instances of eclipse, we went down one, which created its own challenges in terms of how you create the security walls in there and how you deal with things like, so if you're from the adult social care, here's a question for you: how are you going to deal with ordinary residents? So I'll let you think about that one. So next slide, please, Harrison. Safe and legal day one. Here's a tidy up of the slide we saw earlier, and this is for our blueprint. This is what things would look like in terms of getting to vesting day, and then actually, what does year one look like? Because one of the things about vesting day is that's a date which is in the actual plan. It can't move unless government agrees it can move. It moved in Northamptonshire because of COVID slightly. Well, it moved quite a bit in COVID because of COVID. But basically speaking, you hit there, you have to work backwards. You can't work forwards because you cannot miss vesting day. So there are some things, if you think about safe and legal plus, that we knew that the two new unitaries would move into the following year as transformation. And I can guarantee you will have a programme of work up to vesting day. And then at some point, as you get towards vesting day, you will say, okay, what can we safe and legally move into being a transformation program post vesting day? And it's a brand new world there. You've got different colleagues, different local authorities have come together, and you're all on that same journey. And it's almost like a fresh start in a perverse way. Next slide, please. I'm going to pedal on a bit faster.
Yeah.
Opportunities in the journey. Okay, I think we can crack that one over. Okay, so this is how we made it a bit more simple for people in terms of what community excellence and council excellence looks like, and some of the key headlines from that. Again, imagery is important, and it was important that people actually start to think about this and what the world looked like. So essentially what you do is you're showing people how the world would look like post vesting day. Okay, next slide, please. Here's a very high level roadmap. This was became quite a thing. Again, making it very simple for people to understand how we got from July 2019 to April 21. And these are all the key hammer points. And I don't mean we hit people with them. These are the key things that people could actually understand what they needed to pay attention to. And I found it incredibly helpful because you can imagine the program plan was quite detailed. But this was just helpful to know. It was helpful for conversations with members, with partners, and it actually made you think, oh, actually, we're going to get this done. But actually, the Eclipse system go live is worrying me, or the Tom work streams up and running. We missed that. But again, just an example. Next slide, please, Harrison.
I was just going to say, I think I found that really interesting when having a look through before the call, Martyn, because we have still got that time towards vesting day with the current sort of initiative. So I think as much as things can be cracking on at the moment, just a bit of reassurance that you guys managed to come together really quickly to actually deliver a safe and legal transition, which is an important part, I think.
So again, I like simple. So this was how I showed people the complexity to simplicity of what we were doing, how the documentation and evidence supported the delivery of that. And the top left-hand diagram is, I think, something I did when I was probably on the first couple of 3 or 4 weeks of being there and just summarizing the information. And the next one to that is how the service started to show professionals within it, how their model would work of delivery. And some of these you've already seen. So, but again, you get the example, and of course the disagging services, it was a big piece of work. Okay, next slide, please. And again, slightly different way to showing it, but this is how you get to vesting day in a way which is trying to make sense of it for people. And again, you know, people start to carry these types of documents around with them, whether it be on the laptops or physically. But again, it was how you got the story. Remember at the start, we said it was a story, a narrative of how we're going to get there, because we've got to. But working backwards, not forwards, was some of the challenging things. So that's why things became a bit more squeezed at the beginning than we might have liked. So next slide, please, Harrison. And again, I've shown this already. So you get an example of some of the things which we knew we were agreeing on. There was a whole load of slides behind this and a whole load of slides across the whole of the Future Northants work. Across each of the programs of work had the same. So we were speaking the same language, looking at the same documents, being able to actually see some dependencies and interdependencies as we went as well. And also allowed us to say, okay, if we're not moving although we think we agree on disag, we've got to get it from think we agree on to things we do agree on. So, you know, this is quite important. Next slide, please, Harrison. I like this one. It just shows you how using the 3 conversations models with tech fitted across the new map. And that way we made sure we hadn't lost any of the tech. So that was quite important as well. So next slide, please, Harrison. I am accelerating. Okay,
just a quick question, Martyn. We will circle back to a few of the others in there, but I think an interesting one there is were you designing both councils or just the one?
Both. There you go. Both councils, both North and West Northants. And when we got to it, we had a blueprint and operating model for North Northants and a blueprint operating model for West Northants. Very quick. What do we do with public health? It was too small to disaggregate. So we shoved it in North Northants. Technical term, they provided services by contract into West Northants. Those functional areas which were too small to sensibly split, they were allocated into either North or West Northants, and they provided services back to each other under contract. Okay. Because they were separate businesses by then. So next slide, please, Harrison. So again, these were the actual areas for adult social care around. Again, I mentioned that we worked on locality models have been about for years, haven't they? But we started to run these, although at a front, if you were to look at the way people were working, they were still Northamptonshire County Council, but we were starting to break teams into these areas, and they were starting to work, well, as they were meant to be working post-vesting day. One of the things I didn't want it to be was we were leading up to vesting day. Oh, we're at vesting day. Blooming heck, that's a shock. No, we had to get used to it. People need to get used to their ways of working, what was changing. And then come vesting day, when we flipped from, I think it was the 31st of March to the 1st of April, there was no difference for people. They just carried on doing what they were doing. And I remember reflecting back that was actually what happened there. So next slide, please, Harrison, because I need to get to Tim.
Nearly there.
Yeah, so supporting people through change, again, very key. Having workshops to enable people to look at design and development, looking at safe and legal and how we managed that and the coaching that went along with that, and working with people to help people actually deliver and understand what was going on. How we worked and mentored along as we went as well. So that was quite key. Pastoral support being there for when some leaders are going, well, what should we do next and how do we do? I think this is what we do. The idea, as I mentioned earlier, was to get conversation going, but it was supportive conversation. Challenging when it needed to be, but supportive, so that we actually got there and worked through problems systemically. Open and honest, again, don't know, or yes, that could do. And pathway driven. So let's get to where we're going. Let's get to where we're going. Delivery through change. Well, I think sometimes change gets added on, but change is what you do every day. You change something every day. So consider a key part of the program, not an add-on. And a few things to consider in terms of the scope of the change. And again, there is so much to think about when you looked at when you back to that safe and legal thought map some slides ago. The actual amount of energy and work which went into understanding what was a priority, what was good to do and what was nice to do. Again, fundamentally important, but it just allowed you to prioritize to make sure you got to the tipping point. And as I mentioned, things like CQC registration, things like the bank account, again, just allowed you to think about how you're going to get there from a safe and legal perspective. Building relationships and keeping them going at the same time as you're delivering such complexity, really, really key. And change advocates. Introduce the change advocates early. Get them out and about. And when it's say change champions, which is sometimes is the expression used, I think these are people who are going to actually help support delivery and help keeping us focused. And the actual change advocacy approach that was used in Future Northants at the end of the day really, really made a difference to it. Next slide, please. And I'll pass over to Tim now. You can,
thank you very much indeed. Harrison, I just noticed one question, and I think it was around the Children's Trust. Do you want to get that one out of the way first? The question, Martyn, was were we part of the design and the setup of the Children's Trust?
Only where it touched on adult social care. So there was a team which was much the same as we were there working on adult social care and public health. There was a team there working on the establishment of a Children's Trust. So our involvement with it was pretty much as when adult social care touched children's and vice versa.
Thank you. I think that's the end of my presentation. No, sorry, Harrison. Could you go to the next slide? And just as we go into, I'll just run through here, and Martyn may just chip in. I mean, my role was very much, I came in around 10 months towards vesting day, and my role was very much to ensure that the systems and the processes that support the systems and those that we owned, those ones that run for payments, management, etc., were fit and ready to go, obviously, for vesting day. But also those services and the plethora of services that we provided or we were receipt of, little systems, things that we actually I can't remember the name of it, we asked everybody because we'd listed it, and some great analysis that was done underneath there. And I think the key thing as we go into this is just loads of lessons learned. I'm not going to go through every slide and give you a verbatim because there's quite a lot of information here, but was the analysis that preceded that. So having a very good business analyst in there setting the scene was absolutely immense. So here really in terms of people, we went through some great big learning exercises, and what we just want to try and do is pick out the positives. What was key though as an overview is that there was never enough time, or we were always up against the clock. And a question that's ever always asked of me around project management is the best laid plans, how do you get on with them? Well, sometimes, and I'll use the terminology used loosely, you rip them up, because as you go forward you find lots of wriggly worms come crawling out, and as we did. But from a people perspective, there was an awful lot of work that went into. Is just really the first half of this presentation demonstrates the amount of awareness that went on, communication, etc. And very much focused outside in, as we've said. Again, just repeating there, great business analysts, can't absolutely underplay that. Analyze as is, get it out there, lift the carpets. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask any questions and get that story together. And of course, obviously, engagement. Things that we could perhaps we worked on hard was bringing people inside, subject matter experts, which would be senior management or operatives, essentially service managers, people who are actually doing the job. Got to work on them. Some were most were really engaged, but sometimes you have to just nudge along, because obviously we're starting to hit the program at pace. Once we understood the challenges, then of course we needed to bring people along. And I think, IT is going to be the biggest thing that underpins anything. You sit down and you press your keyboard, you sign on, you've got systems that need to be changed, you've got internal test and environments that need to be upgraded, you've got version control, change control, you've got to cut the noise out and focus. And we mentioned change freeze here. That should be absolutely first thing on the agenda. When can we start the change freeze and the impact analysis onwards? Sorry, Harrison, would you move forward?
Yeah, of course.
Just chip in, Martyn, if there's anything I've just broadly missed. So yes, next slide, please. So process, data capture. I'll draw some painful experience around data, but data is absolutely key here. When you're looking at having to split systems or the management of data, there is a whole, as we all know, GDPR, absolute rigid framework and compliance around that. And when you'll start to look at systems and start to separate, you realise the enormity of when you go into vesting day and you're splitting your systems, i.e. East and West, then come vesting day, East ain't supposed to be looking at West and West ain't supposed to be looking at East. So there is ways to overcome that, but that was probably underestimated. And that was one of those wiggly worms that came out, because the whole industry correctly was placed with people who expertise to come in and guide us through what we could and what we couldn't do. What was safe and legal, as we say, just enough. And in that terms, just enough within the edges wasn't enough. We had to make sure that we're specifically adhering to those policies. Service owned approach. This is important in any change, and all of the years I've been around, you've got to motivate. People have to be motivated, because the services are going to deliver this, or they're going to be owning this. We're delivering on their behalf with them, not for them. And I think that's important. And I have to say, the experience with the service people I was working with, unbelievable. Really, really cared about the system, knew the system inside out, knew the process and the system inside out. So therefore, they were the experts. And I was tinkering around the edges, if you like, to make sure that it was in place. Learnt an awful lot, I have to say, and crammed an awful lot there, and was bullied by Martyn around DPIAs, but that's another story. And just to sort of finish off there, identifying, encouraged. That's right. Yes, you kept telling me that. Identify the must-haves and the musts, and that was clear. A really well-worn, weary analysis tool. Moscow. What do we have to have, and what should have? So they're key, and you have to cut the wheat out from the chaff. Just a sort of thing on better next time, just to pick up something. Data compliance, DPIAs, data impact, protection impact assessments, very, very key. So to work with and understand what the impact of the data is as we start to look at the systems and the processes and splitting these up. Of course, maintaining the focus on that on the blueprint, but ensuring that there is also, working through a PMO, we're in line with what the overall program plan is, and making sure that we are compliant, but also not being afraid to say, actually, we've got some problems here, we need to address them. Sorry, Harrison, you want to move on 2 slides?
Yeah, can I just say at that point as well? One of the things which I think we struggled at times to do was, I mentioned this at the beginning, you'd got heading to 2 new unitary authorities, adult social care and public health and children's social care were different journeys to the rest of the districts and borough organisations. And so whereas that was looking at how do you collapse into the 2 new unitaries, adult social care had one leadership team, one DAS, It had to disaggregate its budgets from a core budget and then reaggregate into 2 new unitaries. And it had to create a new team across the 2 new unitaries. So we only had 1 DAS in Northamptonshire. We had to recruit 2 new DASs. We had to recruit a leadership team. And so therefore, that was our journey to a safe and legal anti-unitary was slightly different. And therefore, the actual conversations with the programme itself centrally was different to how some of the other programme conversations were going. And I think we struggled to look at some of the IT early enough. And as a result, your comment, Tim, about being up against it was start your IT and imagining what your IT looks like early. Just because you cannot and you do not want the Office of the Information Commissioner looking at you on post-vesting day. Talking to a key provider of one of the systems about the changes we need to have done by vesting day was important, because they kept saying, yeah, well, when Northamptonshire is done in LGR, no, Northamptonshire won't exist. Yeah, well, Northamptonshire will, no, we need 2 instances of the adult social care model. Yeah, well, in Northamptonshire, no, it will not exist. Yeah, well, what do you mean it won't exist? On the 1st of April, Northamptonshire as a county council, as an organisation, will not exist. It will be a deceased parrot. I didn't quite say that, but it will be no longer, and you will have 2 new councils. They cannot have data challenges, and it comes back to need and want and GDPR and stuff like that. So I think we struggled in some of that to get heads around some of that. I think that's just worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We spent an awful lot of time around data integrity, and there's a question there actually, and thank you for that question, which was how do we go through merging systems of data across the unitarisation? Firstly, the first thing was to look at the contracts that we had where systems were going to have to be split. That was the first cause. Chase the contracts, understand the procurement cycles, and it takes time, and engage the vendors as early as possible. So I think the benefit of hindsight was, although we got in, and in true project form, we got it in on the week, but we had a good timeline with lots of wobbles because version of the IT hadn't updated software appropriately, so that we found that we could affect the changes. The vendors in the multiple areas were pretty good, absolutely very supportive. There's a cost to that, we mustn't underestimate that, but dig out those contracts, engage with procurement and understand our options. And we did have to re-procure, or we had to go back to I can't think of the terminology now, but we had to get a waiver, and that process takes time. So the internal process, the compliant process, does take time. It needs to be agreed, needs to have a business case or a case written to it. And these are all my experiences, pretty much first time in those scenarios. And of course we have to build that particular time in. So of course the benefit of hindsight is we'd list all of that up front and start that process early. So contract novations, yes, they were enabled through government, but we do need to take that time. And don't forget, amendments do take time. And of course then in terms of managing system and the data, as aforementioned, don't underestimate that data. There's a lot of work that needs to go in there to unpick. And of course you're on about the data integrity, and you need full cooperation with your vendors. And there was some issues with one of the vendors. We had to take emergency action essentially because we weren't able to affect the changes to split the system past vesting day. And I spent another couple of months with the assistant director building a business case because the costs started to mount up and they weren't accounted for. So there was a little bit of blindness, I think, in terms of we'd go back to engagement. And to be fair, I received an apology about it. You have to take it on the chin and move forward where you can. And we tried many scenarios to affect the appropriate changes, I suppose, as it were, to that system with minimal costs. And we tried many ideas, but unfortunately, it meant it had to be split. So just those, and that was the biggest worm. And I think in terms of IT resources, you know they've got a big area to manage, and this is just from the county perspective. But focusing early so that we have people allotted to be able to lead on the IT side of things, because essentially that's invaluable and required. So I think in terms of just a sort of summarisation, engage early, get these things written down, and don't be prepared to dig. We couldn't find a contract on a contract database initially. Didn't mean to say it wasn't on one of them. It's just that the one that I was told to go to couldn't find it. So can we just next slide, Harrison? I'm just very conscious now that we're approaching in. So if I may,
slides left, isn't there? I
yes,
think, and then we can answer those questions.
Okay. In terms of just a couple of big ones, I mean, Martyn's more, but I'll just paraphrase. Obviously, branding, image, I think that went really well. Get that early. Let people know where they're going to be based. That's one of the biggest things. And again, thinking back through my experience, you know, people get very concerned about any particular change or transformation. So to settle those nerves in terms of where you're going to be, what your new office look like, your conditions, etc. look like. A lot of us have probably gone through that as we've gone through COVID, and that's setting a new technological sort of way in which we work. We work from home. Moved a new office block. Do I still have my rubber plant in the corner? But let people know, and I think that went really, really well. And then, you know, it's what could we probably reflect upon was just get that story based, you know, where people are going to be based, their badges, getting in the door. I mean, that was a thing. You just think, oh crumbs, that's a good idea. How do we get in and out the door on day one? And then just that absolute wide engagement across the district and boroughs, as well as the county, because the county was easy. We were working in the county, but of course the districts and the boroughs, and then using any learning innovation sites to play, so that there's an area which people can practice and design and understand what that new world looks like. Do you want to move forward, Harrison? I think there's this one more to go. Right, okay, this is where I wanted to go to. So just really, in essence, from somebody gets wavered in, right, Tim, off you go. Start planning early. Yesterday is really good. Get plan the scope, which entails all of the county and obviously the boroughs, and plan those service changes impacts. Must start at the earliest opportunity, and you know, key functions, all the functions, any of the services. Get that picture, which Martyn's absolutely painted really well, and that work was just an incredible foundation for me to be able to do what I needed to do, which was get us over the line to be safe and legal. And you know, do the approaches in stages, and do that by drilling down the service, match it with the blueprints, make sure you're on target. The KPIs are they're the blueprint, they're the guidelines, and you're measuring everything against that. And really, I think, you know, again, probably because that's probably the biggest area I was involved in, the full IT systems, a full and comprehensive audit, everything, suppliers, what they do, what systems do they use, which we might just log in, email addresses, log on details, ensure there's an owner, and mobilize those owners, because they have a tendency not to get too involved until too late. So you have to have nerves of steel and being that annoying little voice, and understand those that are fully owned by sales third parties, engage with the vendors, and they're very, very helpful as a rule. And the approach is
sorry, Tim. Sorry, I thought I'd catch you in a bit of a break. Then I was just going to say we've got 5 minutes and we do have a few sort of questions. So could we maybe just transition to just trying to crack through as many of them as quickly as possible? Because I appreciate people have probably got to shoot at 9. So if I'll just reel through them, and if either of you want to sort of chime in, we'll have to try and keep it fairly concise, but maybe we can follow up with some further information if needed. So I'll go from the top. Essentially, a question around sort of the consultants that were brought in to support the creation of the new councils and the transformation, and if so, what areas were they brought in?
So essentially, there were. I was just reflecting about this again yesterday. There was very, very few consultants in effect. Certainly in adult social care, we had 1, 2, 3, probably 3 or 4 in total, and we worked with teams across the functional area as well as within the programme I suppose really, I think the interim chief exec at the time, and I think she's reflected this recently at an event with Solace actually, where we only brought external help in when it was absolutely needed, but it was needed in terms of some of the skills that they were lacking in terms of moving programs and the OD stuff started. Technology, quite a few brought in to help with the tech. Were any of the big consultancies brought in? I think PwC were in at the business case part of life, but essentially a lot of what we did was based around what was needed at the time when we landed, building in some of the PwC thinking. So it wasn't awash with external consultants. It was mainly with people who could roll up the sleeves and crack on, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Martyn. And sort of leading on from that as well, sort of how did the sort of transformational LGR team work in actuality? Were there different did each section or division of the organisation have its own LGR team? We got an example of was there one for waste and bins, one for adults, one for children's, maybe for housing, and also to build on that, what sort of constituency were there in terms of external resource, maybe interim contractors or actually internal employees that were seconded into those roles?
So yes, there was every functional area had its own program, and we used to we came together every Tuesday as a program team, and then it was every Thursday, or it might have been the other way around, where the chief execs would come in the morning, and the lead members would come in the afternoon. So it was a very conversational approach, and very focused on delivery approach. But essentially, there were for adult social care and public health, there would be an equivalent across children's housing, environment, digital, customer, and so on and so forth. In terms of how the programme was resourced, well, certainly in adults, the assistant directors and DAS were very, very active in terms of what work was being done and when. Adult social care also had an expert from the LGA in to help with some of the changes that was required in terms of the way we went to the 3 conversations model, and she was an ex-director of adult social care herself, so that was helpful, really helpful to have another ear in the conversation. But essentially, our program team was made up of people who were brought in internally, so they were project and program people from Northamptonshire themselves. So yeah, so a mixture of it wasn't a wash with interims. It was, as a chief exec said, it was when there was a gap and was needed. So.
Absolutely. I just want to say as well, we will sort of continue on past 9 o'clock. If anyone does have to leave, then totally understandable. We will send a recording through. So what we will do is make sure we stay on and answer those questions quickly, and then we'll crack on from there. So the next one, Martyn, was and Tim, did the decision-making transfer to the shadow authority when that was set up and established, and how did that sort of impact your decisions and what was going on?
It did. It was evident that as Northamptonshire as a county was going to diminish, that the new guys coming in needed to take ownership and start agreeing some of the decisions. So yeah, but it works quite seamless that they just joined the program approach, and basically where we would benefit from is we'd got this narrative, and we were able to take them through some of the decisions and why they were made as such. And I think one of the things which we were absolutely clear on in adults and public health was that by the time we got to the new appointments of the new DASs and some of the new ADs and so on, that we would have the blueprint already signed off. So we were at the point whereby the guys who were joining the organisation, and I think we had the DASs in place it went live in April, the DASs were in place by December or thereabouts. So they had some time to get used to and sort of like recruit some of their own guys. We'd already got the blueprint approved, and I think I mentioned earlier on in this that we were trying to run a shadow operating model before we needed to, so that we could iron out wrinkles and iron out areas that we might have forgotten or weren't as smooth as they could have been, so that come vesting day it wasn't so much of a challenge. But essentially, as soon as the guys who were going to run the new Unitaries were brought on board, they were brought into the process, and had their say.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, how obviously the scale of this sort of kind of changes is massive, and it's probably greater than most people would have sort of had to manage previously. And one of the questions we've got there is, how do you manage that kind of scale whilst actually delivering BAU for the citizens and service users?
Okay. Well, I suppose you've got to. It's focus. It was really about focus and on making sure we kept a rhythm going. And in programs, I like a bit of a drum beat where we know where we're going to go and we pick up an actual rhythm and beat. So not to be distracted. Don't be distracted by stuff. But people knew their role, and you let people do their role. So there's no way I was going to be challenging some of the assistant directors around what decisions they were making in terms of what they had to do with the day job and the transformation program. And it got me being extremely annoying on, what about this? What about this? When are we going to do this? How about this? But what you've got to do is make it make sense. So it has to feel part of a journey, so that business as usual becomes transformation, becomes vesting day stuff. And basically at the same point, you have to decide what's not worth carrying on. What is we going to stop, or what we're going to not do anything more on, and because it's safe to do so, put it the other side of vesting day to pick up as part of a transformation. Because one thing that will absolutely happen is you will do all this transformation stuff and LGR stuff to vesting day. You'll get the other side of vesting day, then you've got probably another 2 years or so of transformation to reshape the new organisations. And so not losing sense of what we were going and when we were going to get there was incredibly key, whether it was on the transformation program, whether it was and dependencies into a vesting, the LGR program, or whether it affected BAU. And just being really, really clear.
And I think also working with teams on the actual changes, they're very much aware of what they're offering. They know what they should be offering. So, you know, it's almost you deliver this under the radar or the line, but you be absolutely clear about when that particular switchover is. So, you know, teams are very focused on the day job. And as Martyn said, you know, the people I was working with, absolutely infinitesimal. They got it. They realised they had to put a lot of time into this to ensure that that service was equally as good on day one as day two. So I found that, and again, you know, working across these sort of similar situations, the people running these services are equally very, very passionate, and they know what can and can't happen. So I didn't find any particular problem about that particular passion. They knew exactly what they needed to do. Their big worry was what happens on day one to ensure that everything's in place.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And the sort of building on from that sort of citizen focus, and how do you maintain that BAU? How much consultation was undertaken with that community? And I'd go one step further to say, how did that engagement happen?
Well, certainly the adult social care element of it was moving to an outcome model and the 3 conversations model. It was continuous. You know, it was built into. You had to know your customer. You had to know the type of service that they required and wanted. And bearing in mind, it wasn't a standing start. You know, the 3 conversations model in adult social care was something which, while relatively new, people were getting used to. In terms of the wider program, again, community engagement, it's hard to really comment authoritatively, if I could say that word, on how much engagement was going on across the other elements of the program, but certainly in adult social care and public health, it was rolling. It was I said it was developed outside in, from a people focus inwards, as opposed to the organisation explaining what was going to happen. So for the adult social care children's program, I'd say relatively clear. For the rest of the wider future Northants program, I have to say I know it was going on, but I don't know the depth of that. That would be someone else's knowledge of that, I think.
Brilliant. Just a couple more questions, I think, and then we're pretty much at the end. So thank you for everyone that has sort of stayed with us. And yeah, the next one, I think a really interesting point actually around parish town councils and their involvement within the process, and also sort of going on to sort of asset transfers to parish councils and town councils as well. I think, again, leading on from that as well, Martyn and Tim, some of the conversations I've had have been around that asset transfer because the borders are changing within different authorities, and I believe it builds into safe and legal if services are being operated from those assets. So could you speak to that side of things slightly, starting with the parish and town council's involvement initially?
I'll have to declare a very distinct lack of knowledge on that one.
No problem. I think you've done very well so far, so we'll allow that one to pass.
Well, my sense of it, so this is what I think would have happened, is a lot of it would have been post vesting day. The conversations would have taken place into vesting day. I can't remember any asset transfer from adult social care and public health. So, but then that's not to say, I mean, what we could do, if you're happy, there's other guys we could go to who are in the Northants programme who we could go and ask. So don't take my not knowing as the answer. But
yeah, we can go away.
Like every good opportunity, we could go and find out.
Brilliant. I think that's an action for us then, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point though, to be honest, because I've had some other conversations around the importance of assets, both system assets and physical assets, capital assets as well. So I think maybe we can do a bit of further digging on that for another time. And I believe finally, and this is something we actually have discussed, Martyn, and I think a really sort of important point is, were there any numbers around sort of staff leaving the councils up until that vesting day point? I'm not sure we've got the specific figures on it, and through our conversations you've mentioned there wasn't a mass exodus, which I think is really important because there are lots of opportunities through LGR at the same time as having a bit of uncertainty. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit further to whether people did leave and what the general mood was like building up to it.
So I think, as we touched on, there wasn't a great exodus. In fact, in adults, there was a requirement to have more. So there was a recruitment drive on social workers at the time. And again, as I say, it was in adult social care. It was a disaggregating one major service into two new services. So we didn't have enough people in adult social care and public health. So certainly the adult social care side of it. So from an adult social care perspective, there was recruitment going on as opposed to people going. I seem to remember from some of the HR OD updates that realistically, morale was as you'd expect. The changes can be quite difficult, and so people were worried. But I think really what was helpful was just letting people know that the idea was to get to vesting day. Some of the challenges around what organisations with shapes like would become post vesting day, but one of the other things which I think is going to be a thing in this particular LGR round is that it's an opportunity to reset what functional areas look like, what jobs people are doing. It's a real opportunity to stop doing stuff that you know that you don't want to be doing. I know statutorily you have to do things, and that's right, but it's a great opportunity to reset what functional areas look like, and depending on what model you come up with, there'll be opportunities in it for people to actually stay. And if people want to go, then I can't remember there being any big redundancy packages already, redundancy conversations going on in Northamptonshire. I don't think that was a challenge there.
The only thing I would add, just from my experience, that one of the service managers I was working with, who was absolutely great and lovely, had decided that they got to a point in time where this was an apt time to retire. So, and obviously I don't know the details, but as we sort of implemented, she sort of left and had a happy retirement. So that's just one factor to understand as people coming into this could be the signal, if you like, to say, do you know what, that's great, got that in, and away I go. And it's because that's knowledge that goes out the door.